Hey, we're back with another episode of Genuine Questions, and I want to pick up where we left off, talking about how our intelligence agencies are essentially acting like a cartel or a mob. And they will go to great lengths to cover this up. So we ended the part one of this video talking about how the Sackler family, responsible for Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis, how they were able to avoid suspicion, deflect from the bad publicity that was going on by using their money to donate to a lot of museums, art galleries, become very influential in the community. And how that sort of puts people above reproach or consequences when they do have that kind of money to throw around, and so many people in the community are reliant upon them and their good reputation. I want to start this video by talking about how Purdue Pharma was able to work with the FDA to push this opioid crisis. So if you watch the TV show Dope Sick on Hulu, Michael Keaton's really good in that, but they get into how Purdue Pharma knew that OxyContin was addictive. They were purposely lying to, manipulating, deceiving doctors into prescribing it. And they were able to do that successfully because they were working with the FDA, and the FDA actually crafted a special warning label for OxyContin that said it was less addictive than other opioids. And the employee who worked for the FDA who wrote that for him went on to get a job with Purdue Pharma after he left the FDA. It shows you this conflict of interest, pattern of corruption, because there's no way that Purdue Pharma would be able to have pulled this off without the collusion of the FDA helping them manipulate doctors and telling them that this opioid is safer than others.
What's unusual about the process by which it receives its FDA approval?
So there's a guy named Curtis Wright who was the medical examiner at FDA. He was the one they had to satisfy in order to get the drug approved, but also in order to get the marketing claims. But there was a kind of hypothesis that they had at Purdue, which was because of the Contin system, you wouldn't have the kind of peaks and troughs of, a sort of wave of euphoria when a big dose of the drug hits your bloodstream, followed by a kind of diminution and withdrawal. Instead, it's this steady, regulated, continuous flow. And their hypothesis was that because of that, it wouldn't be addictive and it wouldn't be subject to abuse. And that was a competitive advantage vis-a-vis other opioid products that were out there on the market. They start working very closely with Curtis Wright on the approval process. Curtis Wright starts requesting that they send things not to his FDA office, but to his house. And at a certain point, a team of people from Purdue travel to Maryland and get a hotel room, and they spend 3 days with Curtis Wright, helping him write his reviews of their studies.
What do you think emboldened the Sackler leadership to do that without fear of Curtis Wright turning to them and saying, "Are you freaking crazy?"
Yeah.
I mean, how does this unfold?
I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FDA, which they dragged their feet in the way that federal bureaucracies always do. So I actually sued them in federal court to compel them to turn over documents to me. And I got a New York federal judge to order them to do document production to me, thousands and thousands of pages of documents. And my first request was for all the emails of Curtis Wright. And the FDA came back and told me that all of his correspondence and emails have either been lost or destroyed.
You couldn't make that level of malfeasance up. Like, how do they even say that with a straight face? A year after leaving the FDA, Curtis Wright is now employed by Purdue Pharma. Isn't the only obvious explanation here that there was a quid pro quo, a very clear and direct quid pro quo made between Purdue and Curtis Wright?
I think there's probably a great deal of interest in having the FDA officials that you're talking to know that someday there might be a job for them. And that's this hard thing, because it's not corruption in an explicit quid pro quo sense. It's not corruption in a way that's actually all that easy to police. I don't mean to suggest for a second that these are easy questions, but I also think there's what I would call a kind of soft corruption that pervades this whole process. And I don't think it's unique to Curtis Wright. He's a very extreme example. But I mean, to me, as a consumer, right, the idea that the FDA is working so closely with a drug company that literally you don't know where one ends and the other begins, and there's a line that ends up in the package insert claiming that this drug is safer than other alternatives, and nobody can tell you who wrote it.
And in case you're thinking to yourself that this was just a one-time thing, a one-off, it was just Curtis Wright was the one guy who was doing this, working with the one company, Purdue Pharma, we're going to debunk that here in a second, because this next clip is going to talk about how there are many other companies that were involved in this opioid crisis and should be held accountable for it.
As much as we talk about the Sacklers, and it's very important to talk about them and Purdue, we shouldn't be naive and think that that was the only company that was making extraordinary profits out of the opioid crisis. Three huge companies, which are distributors of drugs, Cardinal Health, AmerisourceBergen, and McKesson, they knew very well that their pills, their opioid pills, were being diverted in ways that were causing massive addiction, but they didn't do anything about it. Johnson & Johnson, famous for baby shampoo, was one of the biggest manufacturers of a potent kind of opioid that actually supplied Purdue Pharma with all the oxycodone that they needed in order to be able to market their drug. They wouldn't have been able to do it without Johnson & Johnson.
And it's not just Johnson & Johnson and the big companies that we've heard of before. In this next clip, Jimmy Dore is going to go over several other instances of this collusion between the FDA and these big pharmaceutical companies that they regulate, and how a lot of these people who work for the government, for the regulatory body, into big pharma, they go on to get jobs in the pharmaceutical companies that they were regulating right before they retired. It's pretty corrupt. And then you'll notice the pattern where they're also approving drugs for these companies as well without the proper amount of testing and peer-reviewed studies done on them. They're fast-tracking the approval process. So you're fast-tracking a way for these companies to make massive amounts of profit at the potential risk to the public, and your reward for it is to retire and then get a cushy six-figure job that you don't actually have to do anything to earn that paycheck.
This week, 3 members of an 11-member FDA advisory committee of experts resigned in protest over the FDA's approval of Aduhelm. That's for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. This is from June of this year. Did this get any publicity? Aduhelm was approved by the agency despite the fact that both pivotal trials were stopped early because they were judged to be futile. The FDA's own statistical reviewer did not support approval, and the FDA advisory committee reviewing the application voted it down overwhelmingly. These are the same motherfuckers you're trusting with all this stuff around COVID. Well, additionally, in a survey conducted by Endpoint News, whose readership is heavily weighted at biopharmaceutical industry staffers and executives, over 80% considered the approval to be a bad idea. So how did that drug on June 7th, how did it get approval? Well, 2 words: regulatory capture. Regulatory capture is defined as when a supposedly objective regulatory agency ends up promoting the ends of the industries that they are regulating. The FDA has been captured for quite a while. In March of 2019, Biogen's 2 identically designed randomized controlled studies looking at Aduhelm in mild Alzheimer's patients were stopped due to the Data Safety Monitoring Board judging them to be futile and unlikely to produce a clinically meaningful benefit. Then in October of that year, Biogen announced that after receiving additional data from one of the trials, they decided to file for an approval of the high dose tested with the FDA. Despite the fact that the benefit was only seen in trial 302, while in trial 301, patients on the high dose actually did worse than patients on placebo. At the Clinical Trials on Alzheimer's Disease Conference in December 2019, during a session to discuss the data, no skeptics or even statisticians were given a platform to speak. Additionally, no open question and answer segment was allowed, and all microphones were removed from around the room. This was highly unusual, especially given that question and answer sessions are the rule at a medical conference. Even more shocking was that Biogen and the FDA released joint briefing documents for the meeting of the FDA Advisory Committee, a panel of experts convened prior to a drug's approval, to discuss the safety and efficacy of the drug. Typically, the FDA has one set of briefing documents where they discuss the data from their point of view, and the company has a different set. Despite this questionable degree of collaboration, if not collusion, the meeting did not go well for Biogen. On the key question regarding whether Trial 302 provided evidence of effectiveness of the drug, not a single committee member voted yes, and 10 voted no. 1 abstained. And yet, the FDA approved it effing anyway. Even worse, the actual drug label, which is what physicians and patients review when considering a drug, it reads like it was written by Biogen's marketing team. First, the label indicates that it is approved for the treatment of all stages of Alzheimer's disease, even though it was only tested in mild patients and had meager efficacy even there. This greatly inflates the addressable market size, as now all 6 million Americans with Alzheimer's are eligible for this drug. Given the company decided to price the drug well ahead of any projections at $56,000 per patient per year, this drug could be a real budget buster. They set a fair price, but the Clinical and Economic Review Institute said a fair price would be around $2,500 to $8,300, but they still wanted to charge $56,000 because they're good people over at Big Pharma. And this 6 million patient estimate only includes people over the age of 65, hence they will be covered by Medicare, specifically Medicare Part B, as is an infusion. In 2019, total spending by Medicare Part B was $37 billion. If just 15% of patients with Alzheimer's decided to go on Aduhelm, that would equal $50 billion in spending. Less than 2 weeks prior to the approval, President Joe Biden said that if we don't do something about Alzheimer's in America, every single hospital bed will be occupied in the next 15 years with an Alzheimer's patient. Again, fear-mongering. Guess which 2020 candidate was the largest recipient of campaign funds by a large margin from Biogen and affiliated parties? Well, that would be Joe Biden, the guy who just scared the shit out of you. He got $76,241. Biogen also significantly increased their lobbying ahead of the FDA decision, which, with 2020 being a record year and 2021 being a record first quarter. 11 of the 16 FDA reviewers who worked on 28 drug approvals and subsequently left the agency are now working or consulting for the companies they just got done regulating. 11 of the 16.
Hey, regulate for the job you want, not the job you have.
That's right. Dr. Thomas Lauren, a former director of psychiatric products for the FDA, who had a history of less than objective actions while at the agency. He left the FDA in 2012. He started a consultancy to help companies focused on psychiatric products navigate the regulator's approval process. One of these companies is AstraZeneca, maker of Seroquel. He was instrumental in getting Seroquel a broader approval in 2009, going so far as to personally minimize questions about cardiac risk related to the drug at an FDA advisory committee meeting. After approval, however, there was no hiding from these side effects, and a warning label had to be added to the drug in 2011. Scott Gottlieb joins Pfizer board weeks after departing the FDA. What? That was from July 2019. Months after Scott Gottlieb stepped down from his role as commissioner, he was the commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug, the FDA. He then found himself back in the world of pharma as a member of Pfizer's board of directors. Are you shitting me? That's not illegal. Wow. I mean, I was the chairman of the FDA, and the next thing I know, I'm on the board of a giant pharmaceutical company I used to regulate. That happens. I was going to go into mowing lawns. Next thing you know, I wake up, I'm on the board of Pfizer. As a member of Pfizer's board of directors, Gottlieb will earn a cash retainer of about $150,000 a year plus stock options in the company. So that means he doesn't have to do anything. That's what a retainer means. That means he doesn't have to do anything. They just give him $150,000. There has certainly been some criticism of Gottlieb's returning to the board of pharma company. You think? Has there been? Or head of Public Citizen Health Research Group and critic of Gottlieb in the FDA called the move classic. Classic.
So there's all kinds of instances of corruption where this is going on at the FDA. And might wonder how that even happens, how a government organization designed to regulate the pharmaceutical industry ends up having that type of relationship with the pharmaceutical industry that's regulating, where they all work together and give each other fast track approvals that's not really doing the regulating that they're supposed to, and then they get the job with that company after they help make them a bunch of money. Happens all the time, and they're probably the reason that it happens has something to do with that several years ago they changed how the FDA gets funded. Instead of being a solely taxpayer-funded organization, now the majority of the funding that goes to the FDA comes from these pharmaceutical companies that they regulate. So it's really not that hard to see why the system works this way.
The FDA used to be funded entirely by taxpayers, meaning it was sort of a public-funded body. Now it is increasingly funded by the institutions and corporations that it regulates. What kind of problems could you imagine that might lead to?
Today, close to 45% of its budget comes from these user fees that companies pay when they apply for approval of a medical device or drug. Changes in more recent years have also increased the number of standard new drug applications approved the first time around by the FDA from 38% in 2005 to 61% in 2018.
So it seems that there is an impact when the FDA is funded by the people that make the product that it is meant to be assessing and regulating, just based on, data.
While the number and speed of drug approvals have been increasing over time, so have the number of drugs that end up having serious safety issues coming to light after FDA approval.
Wow, that's amazing. So there's a consequence to that. When you approve things quickly because of economic reasons, profit-driven reasons, down the line, there are problems. Of course there are. If you know that having a set of pharmaceutical companies regulated by an agency that they fund leads to bad drugs being released, change it, stop it.
A Yale-led study showed that nearly 1 out of every 3 drugs approved by the FDA have a new safety issue detected in the years after approval. As patients and their insurers shell out tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars for unproven drugs, manufacturers reap a windfall. Instead of a regulator and a regulated industry, we now have a partnership, said Dr. Michael Carome, director of the Health Research Group for the nonprofit advocacy organization Public Citizen. That relationship has tilted the agency away from a public health perspective to an industry-friendly perspective.
It's not about public health, it's about being friendly to the industry. Public health should be a priority in public health.
The FDA's growing emphasis on speed has come at the urging of both patient advocacy groups and industry, which began in 1992 to contribute to the salaries of the agency's drug reviewers in exchange for time limits on reviews. No shit. So we'll give you some money if you speed up this process. In 2017, Pharma paid 75%, or $905 million, of the agency's scientific review budgets for branded and generic drugs, compared to just 27% in 1993. Boy, how could that affect anything? This is from Forbes. The biopharmaceutical industry provides 75% of the FDA's drug review budget. Is this a problem? I don't know. Problem for who? Is it a problem for Big Pharma and Wall Street and the politicians that serve them? No. FDA's revolving door. Companies often hire agency staffers who manage their successful drug reviews. Job changes raise a conflict of interest questions. It raises a conflict of interest questions. It raises the questions. No, this is the textbook definition of corruption and unethical behavior.
A 2016 study found that 15 of the 26 employees who left the agency later worked or consulted for the biopharmaceutical industry. Of the more than $24 million in personal payments or research support from industry to the 16 top earning advisors, 93% came from the makers of drugs those advisors previously reviewed.
There you are. 93%. That's basically all of it. That's basically all of it. So they've got it sewn up from every potential angle. You're not dealing with the truth. I wonder what other areas that kind of mentality is at play at. Other areas where you're told to just trust the science, trust the data, not question it. Look at how they operate.
You're not allowed to contradict what the CDC or the FDA says about coronavirus or Fauci or the NIH. And I'm like, well, what if they're lying? I'm not allowed to contradict them if they're lying? No. And if you don't want to do what they say, you're an anti-science, anti-vaxxer, and a real prick. That's those people.
The reason I got vaccinated was because Trump said it's terrific. Is that bad?
Oh, that still makes you a prick.
Yeah, and now I like kid cages because they're Biden's.
Yes, that's all I do.
Switch when I'm supposed to.
I switch when I'm supposed to. I switch my principles.
Here's what blows my mind especially when I watch you talk about this is you're quoting the actual people you're supposed to listen to. And what becomes apparent is you're not even supposed to be paying attention to those people. You're supposed to just do the thing we said.
Yes.
Don't pay attention to what Fauci said. Like, just know this is what we're saying now. And not only are you not supposed to read it, you're supposed to not remember it. Like, it's like, I'm not even bright. I can remember things. Like,
well, those same people who think it's horrible to show an ID to go vote, those are the same people who want you to have to show an ID to eat chicken parmesan.
Yeah, right.
You would need to be some sort of mad Pinocchio-style optimist to go, oh yeah, this is all cool, this is all trustworthy, nothing to see here. It would take a level of gullibility, of credulity, difficult to imagine. These agencies being funded by the corporations that they're meant to be assessing and regulating is a farce. If you want a better world, demand that stops. Demand that lobbying stops. It's not impossible to change the world. It's just the people that benefit from it staying the same tell you that change is impossible.
So that goes to show that the FDA is wildly corrupt, and seems that our government has found ways to profit off of drug trafficking, just doing it under the guise of a legitimate pharmaceutical industry, as opposed to selling crack on the street corner. But I want to switch gears from the drug trafficking to why I think they are also involved in human trafficking. And we're going to watch this clip from Jimmy Dore here, where he is going to talk about how this report came out, heavily redacted from the CIA, that shows a lot of employees and contractors for our federal government have been caught with child pornography, sometimes on their work computers during work hours. And pretty much the biggest consequence for them is that they lose their job. The CIA doesn't really seem to be interested in prosecuting employees for committing crimes against children.
Over the past 14 years, the Central Intelligence Agency has secretly amassed credible evidence that at least 10 of its employees and contractors committed sexual crimes involving children. Only one of the individuals was ever charged with a crime. Prosecutors sent the rest of the cases back to the CIA to handle internally, meaning few faced any consequences beyond the possible loss of their jobs and security clearances. That marks a striking deviation from how sex crimes involving children have been handled at other federal agencies, such as the Department of Homeland Security and the Drug Enforcement Administration. CIA insiders say the agency resists prosecution of its staff for fear that cases will reveal state secrets. Come on, we can't prosecute child molesters, or people might find out the Trump P tape is a fake. One employee had sexual contact with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. He was fired. Whew. A second employee purchased 3 sexually explicit videos of young girls filmed by their mothers. He resigned. Oh, he was allowed to resign, so I guess he gets to keep his pension? A third employee estimated that he had viewed up to 1,400 sexually abusive images of children while on agency assignments. Only one of the individuals cited in these documents was charged with a crime. In that case, as in the only previously known case of a CIA staffer being charged with child sexual crimes, the employee was also under investigation for mishandling classified material. So the only person who was ever prosecuted for pedophilia when they caught them was because they had also stolen documents or compromised, mishandling classified material. That's more important to prosecute for the CIA than it is to prosecute someone child raping.
I'd like to interject really quick and point out, unless you're Hillary Clinton, if you mishandle classified material when you are her, nobody really seems interested in prosecuting that. But if you are a CIA contractor watching child pornography on your work computer, the only time they will prosecute you for that is if you also mishandle classified material.
The records do not say what action, if any, the CIA took against him. A contractor who arranged for sex with an undercover FBI agent posing as a child had his contract revoked. These are the punishments. The agency is concerned that in a criminal case, it could lose control of sensitive information. Jeez, what possible information could be more sensitive than the fact that a bunch of pedophiles work at the fucking CIA? Sexual crimes involving children, including the viewing of images of abuse, have been uncovered at other agencies that handle sensitive information. In a November 2009 report, the Department of Defense acknowledged that dozens of Pentagon staff members or contractors had such images. Dozens of staffers? As is typical of intelligence documents, the records have been heavily redacted. Among the information that has been hidden are the names of the accused employees and contractors and details about their jobs at the CIA. So we don't know who these people are or what they did at the CIA. The agency cites privacy reasons, national security, and a federal law that exempts the CIA from disclosing details about its operations. Beyond the CIA's handling of these cases, questions linger over why U.S. attorneys chose not to charge anyone, even when they seem to have significant evidence. One CIA employee signed an affidavit admitting he used a government laptop to view photographs and videos of girls as young as 10 years old being abused by an older guy. When the inspector general examined the man's computers, however, no such images were visible. A federal prosecutor declined to charge the man in favor of an administrative action by the CIA. The personnel board's recommendation is redacted. So we don't even know what they did to that guy. We don't even know what his punishment was. Despite the admission and the evidence that investigators found on his devices, prosecutors from the Eastern District of Virginia declined to take up a criminal case. The guy admitted it. By the way, this isn't new. This is from September 3rd, 2010. Pentagon declined to investigate hundreds of purchases of child pornography. A 2006 Immigration and Customs Enforcement investigation into the purchase of child pornography online turned up more than 250 civilian and military employees of the Defense Department, including some of the highest available security clearance, who use credit cards or PayPal to purchase images of children in sexual situations. But the Pentagon investigated only a handful of these cases, Defense Department records show.
So not only is the CIA not particularly interested in prosecuting the pedophiles within their own organization, but very famous example of this is the Jeffrey Epstein case. There are rumors out there that Jeffrey Epstein was actually working with the CIA, which explained why he got the lenient sentence that he did when he was convicted in like 2008 for a prostitution related charge. They were calling these young girls who he was manipulating and coercing into sexual favors for himself and his other famous friends. The courts called those girls prostitutes and let him basically do like jail from home for a while, and then got to have a party with Prince Andrew when he got out. He was not held accountable in any sense that a rational person would expect justice to be served. And as I was saying, one of the theories out there is that Jeffrey Epstein works for the CIA and puts these rich, powerful, influential people into these compromising positions so that way they have something to blackmail you with. We've talked about it in previous episodes before, where that's how the mafia cartels, how they work, is you don't get to climb too high on the ladder unless they have something on you that they can use to control you. They will otherwise destroy you. So obviously there is no proof that that is true, but it would certainly make sense and explain the sentence that he got, as well as these comments by Alexander Acosta, who I believe was the U.S. Labor Secretary under Trump. So here in this article, Jeffrey Epstein belonged to intelligence. It says the unspoken question is, was the extraordinary tolerance afforded to Jeffrey Epstein for years, even after his nefarious activities were known, deliberate? Specifically, was he allowed to exploit vulnerable minors to enable intelligence agencies to blackmail world leaders for what they did to those girls? It sounds too far-fetched, but the government's own top justice figure reportedly alluded to exactly that. Acosta reportedly explained that he'd cut the deal with Epstein's attorneys because he had been told to back off, that Epstein was above his pay grade. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Acosta could not be reached for a comment last week about this alleged quote, and he was evasive when asked by a reporter in July whether he was aware at any point that Epstein was an intelligence asset. Acosta said, "There has been reporting to that effect. I would hesitate to take this reporting as fact." But there is intriguing evidence elsewhere. In a recent interview with NBC's Dateline, former Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Reiter described what happened as the police spent months quietly gathering and meticulously verifying evidence of what Epstein had been up to. I have part of that clip from Dateline that I'm going to now show you, where this Palm Beach County detective discusses the irregularities going on in the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. You'll notice right at the beginning, he is mentioned that Jeffrey Epstein used his wealth to ingratiate himself in the community to, in his mind, put himself above reproach and criticism from law enforcement.
Michael Reiter is the former chief of the Palm Beach Police. This is his first in-depth television interview detailing what happened inside his department's investigation and the monumental failures that followed. Reiter says Epstein had made donations to the police department and must have thought that would give him influence. As they built a case against Epstein, odd things began happening. 6 months in, detectives took a video camera and searched Epstein's home. The chief believes Epstein had been tipped off.
The place had been cleaned up, not effectively, because there was still plenty of evidence there photographs on the walls, phone messages, and so on, but the video computer was gone and all the wires were left hanging there.
Then, he says, something changed. The state prosecutors at the time in Palm Beach County told him the witnesses were problematic, and the prosecutors seemed dismissive of the case. Did you feel that you had a strong case to bring to trial?
Oh, absolutely.
The chief also says he was surprised by how much Epstein's defense team knew about the investigation before it was public.
We believed that the content of our probable cause affidavit eventually, sometime after we presented to the state attorney's office, ended up with the defense attorneys, because minute details that nobody else knew that were in those documents were being refuted and contrary information provided by the defense. And it really cripples the case.
In 2006, Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Ryder was frustrated with how local prosecutors were handling the Epstein investigation. He asked the state attorney to remove himself from the case, and when that didn't happen, the chief turned his evidence over to the FBI.
And they said, this is an easy case. This is a horrific situation. We'll put him away for the rest of his life.
The FBI is telling you he's going to go away for the rest of his life for this stuff.
Yes, and then that's what the U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorneys told us as well.
Back in Florida, Police Chief Ryder was getting frustrated again, this time by a lack of progress in the FBI case. So he went to see the prosecutor in charge, U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who would later be named Secretary of Labor by President Donald Trump.
He basically said the defense in this case has successfully delayed and frustrated their investigation and their prosecution of the case.
Still, he says, Acosta told him his office was moving forward.
I left that meeting thinking, well, this guy hopefully is going to do his job. He's telling me he is.
But then, in 2007, Acosta decided not to charge Epstein in federal court and sent the case back to the local prosecutors, the very same office that Ryder says dropped the ball in the first place. Now, Epstein made a deal, pleading guilty to 2 counts related to prostitution. Epstein had to register as a sex offender. He served 13 months, but most days he was allowed to leave the jail to go to his office. The deal that Epstein ultimately got, was that a sweetheart deal?
Well, I've never seen anything like it. And this case was clearly, to us, a very prosecutable case.
Perhaps the most unusual part of the deal, federal prosecutors agreed they would not charge any potential co-conspirators. Alex Acosta has said the U.S. Attorney's Office he headed in Florida handled the case appropriately, and he made the deal because a guilty verdict is never a sure thing.
So NBC wrote an article accompanying this Dateline special, and I just want to read part of it because I think it's interesting to see who was on Jeffrey Epstein's legal team. Epstein, who had a massive bankroll and extensive connections, had assembled a high-powered team of lawyers, including Kenneth Starr, Alan Dershowitz, Jack Goldberger, and Jay Lefkowitz. There's Kenneth Starr, who, is supposed to be a good guy in all of this, too, and was, one of the guys taking down the Clintons, and interesting that it's all the same people that defend the high-powered government officials that also just so happen to defend Jeffrey Epstein. Going back to that article that we were reading about Epstein belonging to intelligence, says, Acosta has given conflicting statements about the highly unusual and illegal deal he cut with Epstein's lawyers. As mentioned above, he said he had been told to back off, according to one media account. But when questioned in public about the Epstein deal, Acosta sang a different tune. In July of this year, he said he believed it was a good agreement based on the evidence he had in 2008, and that the new evidence and additional testimony offers an important opportunity to more fully bring him to justice. Acosta's July public statement is plainly a lie. In fact, the 2019 indictment mirrors the charges that federal prosecutors prepared in 2008 and then shelved. It alleges sex trafficking of girls between 2002 and 2005. In court, prosecutors argued that Epstein was too much of a flight risk to be released on bond, and he must be detained at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, even though the feds had allowed Epstein to walk away from the same charges back in 2008. 2 months after being denied bail on the new indictment, Epstein was found dead in his cell. Despite Acosta's conflicting stories and his transparently phony public statement, no one in the mainstream press or Congress has investigated the role the U.S. intelligence agencies played in the Epstein case. It appears that Democrats were initially willing to attack Acosta as a way to embarrass Trump, but apparently once they realized that digging too deep would also embarrass their friends at intelligence, including the former agents who now work as an analyst on cable TV promoting the story that Russia stole the election from Hillary Clinton, they decided to back off. So now we are going to watch this clip where on Fox News they are discussing Jeffrey Epstein's suicide. And at the end, I did include a picture of what his neck wounds allegedly look like. And there's some story about how maybe he had a CPAP machine or something in his cell. And either way, when you look at his neck wound, this is not a bruise up here from a bed sheet. It is a very thin, bloody cut, like he got choked out with a razor wire or maybe the electrical cord from a CPAP machine.
First of all, I'm amazed that somebody who had this incident just a couple weeks ago was found with thumbprints on his neck and so on, not clear whether he either attempted suicide or somebody got to him. Apparently he was supposed to be on suicide watch. Given how high profile a suspect and so on he is, you'd think there'd be a doctor in there with a stethoscope and a blood pressure gauge and so on, and cameras and lights to make sure that nothing like this happened. The fact he was able to either commit suicide or somebody got to him, who knows what happened, because we have so little information here, to me is by itself amazing. Of course, the accusation is that he was not just doing this by himself, but he had a lot of high-profile people around him. Were they involved? So there are a lot of very high-profile people who may be breathing a sigh of relief that this witness to all of that, all those allegations, no longer is with us.
What happens to, as you mentioned, all these people that potentially would be implicated or would have been implicated?
I guess the first question is what really happened in that cell. Did he in fact commit suicide? Did he just have a heart attack from all the pressure and stress? I mean, he is a man in his 60s. All of this might have gotten to him, might have been perfectly natural causes, or it might have been something not natural. So that's the first question. I would be very curious to see the autopsy results. That's the first question. The bigger ongoing question is, these people were accused of being involved in the Lolita Express and Orgy Island and all that. Do they just walk, or do the prosecutors go after those people based on whatever evidence they developed against Epstein?
We don't really know.
No, we still don't know
what happened.
Yeah.
If someone got to him, ultimately in the process.
And who does that benefit? That's what the big question is.
Yeah.
If somebody got to him, or now the case doesn't go forward, who does that benefit?
There are a lot of
questions.
people who wanted this man not to sing, and now he's not going to sing. A couple weeks ago, the guy was found unconscious, so something happened before. So it's unbelievable to me that this man didn't have just around the guard.
And the reason that happens is because he took.
At a bare minimum, this trial would have brought all of this stuff out. It would have been in the headlines for months probably. And now it's entirely possible this entire thing may be put in a file and never seen again. How does somebody on suicide watch manage to take, I guess, sheets of clothes, make a noose, hang it up, get a chair, whatever? I mean, at some point, somebody's got to say, "Wait, what's he doing? Let's go."
Or someone's looking away.
One of the genuine questions I would love to ask Donald Trump is why he hired William Barr to be the Attorney General. Who told him to do that? What was the thought process behind that? Because when William Barr was in office the first time, he was the man responsible for sort of sweeping the cocaine trafficking scandal under the rug with the Mina airport. That they were fine investigating up to the point I was like, oh, it's boring. The CIA was doing some things without congressional approval, but it was really just to help some freedom fighters. So that's the end of the story. And there was no investigation into the allegations and evidence of the drug smuggling that was happening on the return flights. So I wanted to give William Barr the benefit of the doubt, though, when he first got hired, because maybe he wanted to come out of retirement because he knew about all of this corruption and he couldn't do anything about it at the time because those people were threatening him or his family. And now that there is a new president in office, somebody who is outside of the political realm, Barr wanted to come out of retirement and to right the wrongs that happened back in the 80s. And it does not appear, though, that that is how it played out. Seems that Bill Barr is doing the exact same thing this time. He's the CIA's cleanup guy to come in and slow walk an investigation until time expires on the clock and nothing happens. And any information that we do have that needs to come out, we'll make sure we paint it in the best possible light. And I bring this up because he does it again here with the Jeffrey Epstein case. He was interviewed by the Associated Press aboard a U.S. government aircraft, and it says Attorney General William Barr said he initially had his own suspicions about financier Jeffrey Epstein's death while behind bars at one of the most secure jails in America, but came to conclude that his suicide was the result of a perfect storm of screw-ups. Barr said his concerns were prompted by the numerous irregularities at the New York jail where Epstein was being held. But after he said the FBI and the Justice Department's Inspector General continued to investigate, he realized there were a series of mistakes that gave Epstein the chance to take his own life. I can understand people whose minds went to the sort of worst-case scenario because it was a perfect storm of screw-ups, Barr told the AP as he flew to Montana for an event. The Attorney General also sought to dampen conspiracy theories by people who have questioned whether Epstein really took his own life, saying the evidence proves Epstein killed himself. He added that he personally reviewed security footage that confirmed no one entered the area where Epstein was housed on the night that he died. So, there you have it. Bill Barr says, case closed, nothing to investigate, just a bunch of people messed up. Nobody's really been held accountable for it except for a couple of security guards who are maybe like sleeping or online shopping or something. But that's the end of it. You're a conspiracy theorist if you don't find that answer to be satisfying. Had Epstein lived, one reason foul play should be suspected is that any criminal trial of Epstein or his co-conspirators would have been highly problematic for the federal government. Epstein's lawyers would have been obliged to explore whether Epstein believed that government officials with actual authority sanctioned his crimes because he was providing them with sexual blackmail materials on targeted leaders. In other words, the government might have to reveal in court that Epstein belonged to intelligence. A public criminal trial would have made it very hard to cover up Epstein's relationship to intelligence agencies. These are the agencies that tell U.S. presidents which countries to bomb, which leaders to depose, and which terrorists to assassinate by drone. Such a scandal would likely lead to major reforms and oversight of U.S. intelligence, similar to what we saw in the wake of Watergate in the 1970s, with the Church Committee investigation of the CIA, FBI, IRS, and NSA. And it's the job of the press and informed citizens to keep talking about the case until we get truthful information about Epstein and all his co-conspirators, including the ones allegedly working with U.S. intelligence. And in the spirit of that last sentiment about how it's the media and the public who need to be continuing to investigate this case and keeping it alive because the government's clearly interested in it getting swept under the rug, I want to share this video of journalist Glenn Greenwald talking about the CIA and the hypocrisy of the media that works for the CIA and how they are imprisoning and smearing the reputation of Julian Assange, who is doing what a journalist should actually do, which is exposing the crimes of the government. That's what Woodward and Bernstein did for Watergate. When you are using your investigative tools to go after the powerful, that is what a real journalist does. In my mind, what a respected journalist does.
The imprisonment of Julian Assange is the greatest threat to press freedom by far over the last 5 years, certainly infinitely more dangerous than, say, mean tweets by Donald Trump about like Jim Acosta or Chuck Todd. And yet the media essentially ignored this story, this new story, is ignoring the imprisonment of Assange. I think that the way that journalists who work at media corporations justify their indifference is by saying, I'm not like him. I'm a real journalist, which is such a fucking joke, right? Because he's actually the one revealing the secrets the government doesn't want people to know, which is what journalism is. And they're the ones calling on the opponents of the government to be censored or imprisoned. Nothing makes me sicker than watching over the last 5 years the Democratic Party venerate this agency that has done nothing but kill people and assassinate dissidents and kidnap people and overthrow democratically elected governments, all while pretending to be so offended that Russia put up a few Facebook bot pages and Twitter bots, as though that kind of interference compares in any way to the massive crimes that the CIA has been committing. It additionally makes me sick to listen to the Obama administration or the Biden administration pay homage to the vital importance of a free press during the Trump years, when I knew that the CIA had been doing this. They prosecuted Assange. The Biden administration is responsible for Julian Assange, arguably the most important journalist of our generation in the Western, part of the world, to be rotting in prison. So the only reason he's in prison is pending a trial or an extradition hearing at the Biden administration's demand. So, Jimmy, what changed? Why did Democrats in 2010 and 2011, 2012 take the position that they could prosecute Julian Assange? But now in 2020 and 2021, they're adamant that he remain in prison. What changed? There's only one thing that changed between those two times. In 2016, Julian did reporting that harmed Hillary Clinton because it reflected poorly on the Democratic National Committee. It exposed corruption by the top 5 DNC officials and forced them all to resign, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz. It proved that the DNC cheated on behalf of Hillary. So the only reason that Democrats now want to prosecute Julian, whereas back then they concluded that they couldn't, is because he reported negatively on the Democrats. It's like being a political prisoner. It's not just that they're threatening press freedom, it's that their motives are purely political.
I couldn't have said it better myself, which is why I didn't and just showed you the clip. And now I just want to close out this episode where Jimmy Dore shows a clip of Mike Pompeo, who used to be the CIA director, talking about the training that CIA agents go through and how basically they're taught to be these corrupt, nefarious people. And then it's funny because Mike Pompeo realizes what he's saying in the middle of it and then tries to backpedal real fast and talk about how this is actually, just like the American dream or whatever he calls it. And it's, but I always like seeing it when these people in power let the mask slip and tell you what they really are thinking and what's really going on. Those to me are the most interesting. And here's a quick clip of Mike Pompeo doing exactly that.
What's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
That's all that I have for this episode of Genuine Questions. I appreciate you guys watching. You can tune in to the next one. We are going to talk about the Bill Gates hosted Event 201, and we will see how these corrupt government entities joined forces with the pharmaceutical industry and the worst person on the planet, Bill Gates, to do practice pandemic exercises in October 2019. And I have a whole slew of genuine questions about that event. And I hope you guys tune in to watch. Thanks.